myself. I took off from work. I got off the swing shift and I was going to back.
And this is the special authority meeting regarding the transportation expenditure plan. I assume you did the Pledge of Allegiance for the prior meeting, right? Right, so we don't need to do it again. Before we take public comment, I would like to apologize to the members of the audience for our delayed start. An issue has come up regarding item 1.2 that you will all hear about. And the board will have the opportunity to make a decision and weigh a variety of different positions on this that have come up in the last few days. And when Commissioners Pierce and I and Murray left the discussion, it was still going on. So I don't know exactly what they're going to come to us with.
But it seemed to be getting closer.
We were closer than it was several hours ago, but we're not there. So I appreciate everyone indulging us. So our next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for people to comment on items that are not on this evening's agenda but are within our purview. And for any item you'd like to speak on, we'd ask you to fill out one of the speaker cards and give it to Ms. Grover. We have one speaker slip so far for item C, Jason Bezos. Mr. Bezos, welcome.
How many, 3 minutes?
3 minutes, please.
Good evening. My name is Jason Bezos, and I've come to you twice before. Once was back in November of 2014 to discuss this AB 1107 18 sales tax issue. I also had an op-ed that was in the Contra Costa Times, which I've put in your packet from September 2013. I came back here when you were planning the TEP to again let you know about my concerns about this tax. And so I prepared yet another analysis for you here this evening. There's an unfair arrangement, and you need, just like we learned during the drought, you know, I was one of those people who put the water under the sink and it was warming up and took the water out and watered the plants with it to make do with what you have. It's a mistake, you know, to be considering other taxes when you have not dealt with this AB 1107 18 tax. So there's a 30 years is your TEP, your time horizon, 2017, I think, to 2047. So I took a 30-year period here, and this is existing sales tax money that comes out of people's wallets right now here in Contra Costa County. And the grand total comes, and basically, as I explain here, there's a deficit. The money is only getting, all the money out here in the 925 area in this 18 sales tax goes essentially to Muni, to subsidize Muni. Over the 30-year period from 1985 to 2014, there was a $463 million deficit. So Muni got more money. That's how much money got subsidized from the East Bay. And of the 925 cities, $353 million. Again, $353 million of existing transportation sales tax funds. And I've broken it out by city. And I asked you to go out there and talk to the people like Mr. Arnerich. I think the people in Danville would not be happy to know that they paid $15 million over a 30-year period, and yet you're asking them for a new tax. Mr. Durant, Pleasant Hill, I shop at your Kohl's store, $27 million. And $27 million. And then I put off the side there to see what the current Measure J street funding is, and it's about comparable in many of these cities. So if you only exercise a little bit more discretion, I've come here for nearly 2 years trying to tell you to look into this. The best I got was I had to get something from a Public Records Act request. You've not discussed it here at all. And I'd hope that Supervisor Glover, that you had looked into this at the MTC, apparently have not. Amy Worth has not done it. You need to go plug the hole first before you seek a new tax. I don't know if that light means my time's up.
It means it's close.
Okay, all right. What is that? What's yellow?
Yellow means close, red means stop.
30 seconds. Okay, I don't want to dig up the hole here. But I break down at the bottom so you can see for the East County cities. So East County put in $70 million of the 30-year period. Again, inflation adjusted. I can provide a spreadsheet. People want to know. That Walnut Creek, area there, that's kind of Supervisor Anderson's district, about $137 million, and that's kind of Supervisor Mitchoff's roughly the $145 million. So what are you going to tell the people on the street if they're already paying a tax?
So now it is red.
All right.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Great. Thank you. Next item is item D, which is a discussion of the minutes or approval of the minutes from our meeting on July 6th.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pierce, second by Commissioner Romick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. It's unanimous. We now move on to the regular agenda items, and I just wanted to ask the attorney, Ms. Subramanian, question. Can the authority alter the order in which we discuss these?
It depends which one you want to pull out.
1.2.
1.2, you can take first. Is that what, or you
No,
want to
no,
take it
no.
last?
It's more potentially take it later.
You have to approve the TEP before you approve 1.3 and 1.4. So
Okay.
it was all very strategic in terms of
That's fine.
the placement.
So we could do 1.5 out of order, for example.
Yes, you could.
Okay? That gives-
You could do 1.5 and 1.
So with the authority's concurrence, if we could do item 1.1 first, and then if there are people still huddled back there, I'll go to 1.5, and then we'll tell them they have to come out and give a report and move to 1.2. So item 1.1, Mr. Carlton. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Tatson, members of the CCTA board. My name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO. The item before you has its roots in Proposition 13 in the GAN initiative, and it's an item that calls for a procedure to be done each year by local governments. It's something that you're probably familiar with in your local jurisdiction. It's tied to the budget process. The intent of the law is to limit the amount that a local agency can appropriate in their budget to not exceed the amount of tax revenues that are received by that agency. This was something that General Counsel asked us to do in connection with the other actions that you have in front of you tonight. The calculation simply shows that of the amount of property sales tax revenues we receive, we can apply certain exclusions for debt service. We have an appropriations limit of $126 million, which is well above our appropriations in the budget. So it's really just a administrative act of the board to approve this resolution so that we're in compliance with the other actions on the agenda tonight.
Great. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Move the item.
Okay, is there any public comment before we vote? Seeing none, I have no speaker slips on this item. There's a motion by Commissioner Mitchoff, a second by Commissioner Durant. Commissioner Arnrich, I'm sorry. So seeing no other comments, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So it's unanimous. Thank you. So let's now move on to item 1.5, which is the Public Information and Education Plan. And this will presume that we get through items 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 later this evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. I was just whispering to Terry Ann because I wanted to make sure in front of you, you should have a revised handout for 1.5, and there are some copies on the back table as well. It's a revised staff report that has some redline strikeouts, so you can see that the underlined text is new and added text, and there is some text struck through, so we'd like you to accept this as an amended staff report should you choose to move this forward. And these changes in here are actually edits by our legal counsel. She wanted to be extra sure that we were very clear what we were talking about, and I'm sure that she will be reviewing quite a few things in the future as well, should the board make some certain decisions. So, in brief, the content of the staff report has not changed. Staff is asking the board to consider reallocating some funds that were originally intended to be used as part of the Graybo and Scott contract and repurposing those to be used for public information activities related to the transportation expenditure plan. The amount we're requesting be reallocated is $100,000, and what you have in your staff report is a very brief outline, which was requested at the last special authority board meeting, on some of the activities that we would propose to use those dollars towards. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Mitchoff.
Yes, Mr. Tatson, we had a conversation based on Mr. Beavis's public comment at our first meeting a little bit ago, and I just want to make sure, and maybe our council can handle the discuss this. We moved some money or allocated some money from Measure C leftover. Is that what this $100,000? No. Okay. And I don't want to step in anything, but I assured Mr. Beavis and the audience here that no public dollars were going to be used towards this. So I'm not clear on where the $100,000. I just want everybody to know, and this is before I get the voter packet. We have to pay for that. We have to pay for the election. But as far as educational materials and educating the public, no public dollars, my understanding, are to be spent after this qualifies for the ballot.
If you don't mind, if I might be able
Yes,
to answer
please.
that. So you're correct in that, assuming this gets placed on the ballot, the sales tax measure, the TEP, I want to be very clear, is not something the voters ever vote on. It is required to be in the informational handbook, but the voters never vote on the TEP.
That's okay, thank
And
you.
the law requires, and this is what you've been referring to, that we cannot spend public funds or resources to advocate for a ballot measure. However, the ballot measure is the sales tax.
Gotcha.
And so what you have before you is a discussion about the TEP and educating, or excuse me, providing information to the public about the TEP, which again is not part of the ballot measure.
Therefore, public dollars can be used for that.
Correct.
Thank you. I just wanted to make that
Correct.
distinction. Thank you very much.
Are there other questions of staff? Okay, I do have a speaker slip. Mr. Beavis?
Good evening. This is
Welcome.
a little bit out of order from what I expected. So, first of all, I'm a little bit concerned by that, about the language that you're considering adopting today, say, to implement a transportation expenditure plan. So as part of educating about the transportation expenditure, it's part of the ballot. What you have to do, and commanded by Stanson v. Mott and others, and I hope you will, Madam Attorney, educate this commissioners about this. It is a command of the California Supreme Court, most recently upheld in Vargas versus Links in 2009, that whenever you're talking about a tax measure, you have to educate both the good and the bad. And there's a great line in there from Justice William Brennan, including a tax increase if it's a tax increase. And so this distinction that you can just go out and just educate people about a TEP and not mention the fact there's a tax increase, it's utterly ridiculous. I mean, the language you're considering adopting today says to implement a transportation expenditure plan. I don't know where you're splitting hairs on this. I'd like to know what your legal authority is for what you're speaking there to. And then the other point I wanted to bring up was I've seen these web ads for something says less traffic on I-680. We've got a plan for that. And, you know, I'm just sitting there trying to wonder, less traffic on I-680, so you're claiming if we pass this tax increase, we're going to have fewer cars on I-680. I mean, these are the types of things that need to be thought more thoroughly. You know, you need to give a fair presentation of the facts. That's the command of the California Supreme Court. And also I suggest you get educated, all of you get educated, including all your consultants in the audience, on Government Code Section 8314. And that also has a statement in there about how, you know, that there has to be a fair and impartial statement of the facts in anything that's put out. And I would argue anytime you're talking about this TEP, there needs to be somewhere that it says, discloses the negative, including the tax increase. I suggest you pull out Stanson v. Mott, the 1976 Supreme Court precedent, and carefully read it and get the information out of there. I don't want this to be, I don't know anything about the background here, but the Alameda County Transportation Commission, how utterly corrupt it was that they were running the campaign out of their general counsel's office. Literally, the general counsel, the campaign committee is registered to it. I mean, so there's just a Wild West in how these things are done. I want to make sure, I'm a resident of Contra Costa, I want to see this is right, and I appreciate Supervisor Mitchoff for trying to make sure that you're all comporting with your oaths to uphold the Constitution. And I think there needs to be an education first of these commissioners and your consultants as to what is permissible and what is not permissible. And, ask an opinion to the California Attorney General if there's something that's unclear. But I want to make sure it's clear right up front.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Does anyone have any comments regarding this? So there is a recommendation in front of us. Or is there any commissioner discussion?
Move the recommendation.
Second.
Okay.
The amended language that was on the dais this evening,
Right.
just for clarity.
Okay. And may we assume that this is a recommendation, assuming that the measure is placed on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors? Okay. All right. Motion by Commissioner Glover, second by Commissioner Durant. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So we would now, Mr. Carlton, could you go back to the conference room and tell them we're ready for them, and we'll take about a 2-minute break while they come in. And then we'll deal with item 1.2.
Adopt ordinance 16-02, which approves the transportation expenditure plan. These are a sequence of actions that must be presented in this order and to follow with the applicable statutes. A couple of things to talk about on this item here. If you've looked, the ordinance 16-02 does have the TEP as an attachment. And I know that many of you have seen a version of the TEP that has pictures and graphics, et cetera. This version is the one that we prepared for the registrar. They will not accept pictures and graphics, et cetera. So if you've seen any changes, or if it looks different, it's for that reason solely. The ordinance itself is modeled largely after the Measure C ordinance, which was updated for Measure J. So some of the sections in here in item 2 in particular have been updated based on our current relationships with Caltrans and transit operators and so forth. So that's in some cases a little different language from the prior ordinance, but it's pretty much the same that was in Measure C and Measure J. I do need to direct your attention to a handout that has just been placed on the dais. It is it's page 1.2-7 of Ordinance 1602, and in it, it inserts a new proposed section H, which is BART maintenance of effort language. So as you recall, we had maintenance of effort language in the TEP for BART. Over time, we've learned that the language that was in the TEP was limiting the amount of operating allocations that were committed by BART each year to its capital projects. So we wanted to have revised language that really reflects the full commitment that BART has made over the last 5 years or so towards its using its operating allocations for its capital projects. The largest expenditures of operating allocations on capital projects are for what they call their big three. So that's the car replacement, the Hayward Maintenance Complex, and their upgrade to their train control system. I've worked with a number of stakeholders and have run by a version of this language very similar with MALA, and a couple of points there. It's in the ordinance and is really reflects the intent of what's in the TEP. So there's been some discussion about, should this be in the TEP or in the ordinance, and it really has effect in both of these documents. So with that, I would entertain any questions. As an ordinance, when the time comes for a vote, we will be asking that we take a roll call vote.
Are there questions? Yes, Commissioner Mitchell.
I just want to make sure, because I remember having a conversation about this language So, no blame intended, because there's just so much to put together. Was it just left out by error, whatever? Or what happened that we're now having to put it
Okay.
in when it
Yeah.
was supposed to be in?
So the language that was in the TEP referred to a specific BART resolution that committed, based on their forecast, about $325 million of operating allocations to capital projects. And some of the forecasts, Carter Mao was here about a year ago and talked about, based on certain assumptions, that could be as much as $1.6 billion, and now it's looking like it could be 1.7. The point is that it will change based on conditions. So we're trying to find a way to, go above the 325 million and get closer to the 1.7, but allow BART, some flexibility in managing their budget.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, we've had conversations that there's 300 million in the TEP for whatever BART needed that they can't get in their own bond measure. I can't remember if the cars, that's what I thought. And based on other counties coming on board and a time frame that money sort of had to be saved so that it was there to go for cars. Is this language addressing a different issue, the maintenance of effort that we need BART to do all along,
Right.
separate and apart from that other
Yes,
language?
yes.
Thank you.
So, well, I have one. So looking at revised language H, could, about, beginning of the second half, there's a line that says, for normal annual fluctuations in capital project or operating expenditures. Could somebody explain to me what is meant by normal fluctuation in operating expenditures?
So what I've understand, and folks from BART may want to chip in as well, BART often has, so operating actually includes maintenance as well. So recently they had a large program to expend a lot of funds to do some work to try to keep their existing fleet in service. So that was a fluctuation for a couple of years. So operating is more than just paying the salaries of the drivers, et cetera. It's the maintenance that doesn't rise to a capital improvement.
So is that what is meant here, or does it mean anything that's not capital?
Yeah.
So this is, if you could introduce yourself, this is.
Good evening. I'm Pamela Herhold. I'm the Manager of Financial Planning here at BART. And what we meant by this language, as we discussed earlier with Ross, we have occasionally reinvested a substantial amount of money in our maintenance efforts to, for example, the most recent example is that we invested a lot of it, excuse me, I'm trying to gather my thoughts here. We recently increased our operating budget to allow for maintenance to get more cars out in revenue service. You may recall that about a year and a half ago, or maybe a year ago, we added a number of trains to the Pittsburgh Bay Point line to increase capacity, and that was an operating cost. That was not a capital expense, and that was something that we hadn't foreseen a few years earlier. But we realized that we could spend additional operating money to, in effect, buy more cars. We pulled these cars out of maintenance. We repaired them. They were accident vehicles. This was all operating expenditures. We don't want to tie our hands in the future to allocating funds to capital if we can better use them in our operating program to put more service out there or improve any of the capacity constraints that the riders on the Contra Costa County line are currently experiencing. So we need to maintain that flexibility.
Okay. So recognizing you can't speak for the BART board, but from your perspective, if we said capital project or maintenance expenditures, would that be satisfactory?
Yes.
Okay.
From my point of view, yes.
Okay.
That's much better.
So in that line, it starts for normal annual fluctuations in capital project, or and it says, or operating expenditures now, we could say, or maintenance expenditures instead of operating.
That takes out the,
Commissioner Pierce.
that takes out the potential for it going to labor. And
Except
that's
for
been the
maintenance labor.
objection.
Okay. Commissioner Arnovich.
So I appreciate this extra effort. I mean, it's kind of, we did generally talk about this, so I appreciate the effort. But it's beginning to bother me. And what's bothering me is this is all the language. If we don't do what the primary purpose is, we've committed $300 million to buy BART cars. That was the ask, that was the lift, that was the political will. But this is all starting to create language. Well, if we don't buy BART cars, then we might be doing this. We might be fixing bicycles. Our effort is.
This is for BART cars. This
No,
applies to BART cars.
Yeah, but the way I read it, I'm reading it in the context, because when you go back and look at the title, we don't actually say that anymore. We say BART capacity, bicycle, pedestrian access, and parking improvements, $300 million. It doesn't even have BART cars in there. So that's the transportation, that's the TEP.
The TEP summary.
1, 2, 13. Right, so that's a title. But the fact is, I'm beginning to think that there's subterfuge here, that we're missing what we said we want to keep our eye on the ball. I want to buy BART cars. I can sell BART cars. So we're doing all these other things. We don't have to worry about this. If we write a check for $300 million for cars, it's done. One-time function. So what is the undercurrent here that's happening?
So if I could try to answer that?
I appreciate it.
So if I
Thanks.
go to page 1.2-16 of the TEP, and Mr. Chittenden can correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that, still says, if funds in this category are intended to be allocated by the authority for the acquisition of additional BART cars, provided that BART agrees to fund a minimum of $100 million in BART station access and parking improvements in Contra Costa County, and 2, a regional approach that includes participation from our friends. None of that is changed by the red language you have in front of you regarding the ordinance.
That's why I asked that question earlier, and Ross says it's separate and apart from what our main goal was, because then, to follow on with Don, it says, there's that paragraph, in the event that commitments from the 4 parties, blah, blah, blah. This is maintenance of effort, which is different than purchasing BART cars.
Right. To some extent, I think that, Ross can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the language that's in front of us tonight is a clarification of the bottom paragraph on the right column of that same page.
Correct. Yeah, that's trying to make sure that we're not limiting it to just 1 or 2 funds. It's any of BART's operating funds that could be used for capital projects.
Assuming we don't buy BART cars. That's my
No, this applies.
It does.
No,
We didn't no, just a second. We did not restrict to put $300 million up for BART cars. That was never our discussion. It was only if we don't do this and we're going to go to this lower tier, then the maintenance of effort and all these other things. And so you're reading things into, I'm just reading what I see. I don't see that link there. And I'm also concerned that we say BART capacity, access, and parking improvements. That's the title. Why didn't we say BART cars, access, and parking improvements?
So I understand that we're entitled to different interpretations, but I'll give you mine, which is in the first paragraph of the right-hand column. It says, in the event that commitments from the 4 parties to fund additional BART cars, and it goes into how the money might be otherwise spent.
Then this is where this applies.
And then the next paragraph says, prior to the allocation of funds to BART. To me, that means prior to the allocation of any funds to BART, whether it be for BART cars or for the alternative in case the BART cars don't come through. If we somehow need to clarify that, I think we would all be in agreement, and our staff and attorney could give us language to do that. And then if you look at the language H, it actually says prior to any appropriation, allocation, or reimbursement of funds for BART cars from this measure to BART. I think that's pretty clear that it relates to cars.
It does. That really wasn't the intention, but I just see that these are these aren't exactly all on the same page. They talk about it in different ways. So
Correct.
which one governs? Okay, this one does say BART cars, this one doesn't talk about it that way on the main.
So maybe we're going to ask Mr. Chittenden or Mrs. Subramanian as to
I just
which-
want to be
which cover.
really clear
Okay.
on this.
No,
This
that's
has
a good question.
gotten
I
too
agree.
controversial to.
Mr. Subramanian.
I concurred with your interpretation.
So, and then I think Commissioner Arnrich's other question, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of how I'm going to paraphrase it, is that because there is some difference in the wording, if we adopt the ordinance, including this section H, does that prevail over what may be inconsistent wording in the TEP itself?
I would think that the TEP would prevail.
Over the ordinance.
Correct, if there was an inconsistency.
Okay.
Chair, the bottom line is, we had the conversation and discussion that the 300 million that's allocated in the TEP is to go for cars. If the measure doesn't pass in other counties, we had a discussion on how that money could be used. But this is a separate issue. This is just BART's maintenance of effort that we've always wanted in there, regardless of the 300,000, correct?
Right.
Yeah, 300 million.
300 million, thank you.
No, Gail only
They're all
wanted
big numbers.
300,000.
Sorry. Okay, and so that's where I'm comfortable, is that we still have the protections about that money being there for when everybody gets their act together and we can start buying cars. But Bart's still saying that they need some flexibility on their maintenance of effort and how they do their business, you know. Okay, thank you.
So Commissioner Hudson and Commissioner Peebles.
Yeah, I want to take it back to where you were with prior to the allocation of funds to BART. The Authority Board shall make a finding that BART has consistently maintained its commitment to use a proportional share of its operating allocations. I believe that's what you were just talking about. We're not changing that part to maintenance.
Right.
For the highest priority capital projects, including new rail cars, positive train control, and the Hayward Maintenance Station? How'd we get to Hayward?
So it should be Hayward Maintenance Complex is the term BART uses. It's expanding their maintenance facility that's system-wide. So it's not limited to Alameda County.
Can we
It's a
take
system-
Hayward out and just put in, you know, because,
So the new language takes it out. The
so
language,
this language is going to replace that paragraph in the TEP?
That's my request.
No, that's the problem.
Because they don't say the same thing, and what Don
Yeah.
paraphrased was right. It would seem, because we've rewritten that paragraph and we now call it H, why wouldn't we change that paragraph? Because as Mala has said, our attorney, the TEP's going to take preference. And whatever the TEP says, the ordinance won't count, so why not just put it in there?
And
I don't have a problem with that.
And I think it's
Clear.
hard to sell voters on voting for something that's in Hayward. We understand why you need it, but you don't mention, I mean, it should be, and maintenance stations, maintenance complexes. Anyway, that seems like shouldn't.
I'm concerned about making changes to the TEP that would be considered substantive, because we've gone through a very detailed process of going to the cities and the towns and the county. I do want to clarify that should at any point there be some inconsistencies, we can always amend either the ordinance or the TEP. That's a process that stays within CCTA and the cities and the towns. It doesn't require going to the voters.
Okay, so my list of speakers is Commissioner Peebles, Commissioner Durant, Commissioner Arnerich, and then I had a question, and then Commissioner Murray.
Yeah,
Commissioner Peebles.
I agree with Commissioner Mishoff. I think, from what I'm hearing from Commissioner Arnerich, that he's not reading the source of money here the same way I am. This is not money from the TEP. This is not money from the tax. This is what BART promised to do in order to get the $300 million for cars. They promised to come up with $100 million or whatever the number is to do improvements in Contra Costa County that originally this agency was going to fund. And so it's in a way, it's sort of a fund swap. But this is not defining where the sales tax money is going to go. It's defining where BART's general funds, which come from all kinds of sources, are going to go.
Thank you. Commissioner Durant.
So, all right, I'll say first things first. We got handed the material and we started talking about it before any of us have really had a chance to read it, and it's a little bit hard to multitask and read this language in the context of the TP and compare it to the language of the TP while we're listening to other people speak. So out of fairness to those of us who haven't been involved in whatever process got us to the language, I think we need some time to look at it and to be able to compare this language word for word to the TEP. I've been sitting here trying to do it, but I'm also trying to listen, and I'm a pretty darn good multitasker, and it's vexing me. So the first thing I'd like to ask is that we take about 10 minutes so that folks have the opportunity, with respect to the audience, because it's unfortunate we're in the position where you have to sort of wait and watch us do work. My only alternative is to say, let's stop wasting time tonight and pick this up at another meeting another day so that we actually have time to really evaluate what's going on. And I don't like doing things this way. It just feels like it's a little bit too rushed for me to try to do this right now. So I'd like the opportunity to take a look at the language, compare it to what's already in the existing TEP, and then have us come back and have an informed discussion.
And I'm happy to
And
do
can
that.
I ask
would-
a question on that? This language is all brand new, correct? All brand new. It's,
No.
Took the original language and amended it.
well, because there's no strikeouts.
Well, that's part of the, literally, we don't have a strikeout, so we didn't.
That's what I'm trying to
You have
get
to
at.
literally sit here and read word for word and see what's changed in order to make it make sense and to understand what has changed, because little teeny words matter, and the elimination of teeny words matter, particularly given how hard we all work to get to the original compromise language.
Well, and that's where I'm thinking that maybe we should get a strikeout version and take the time and come back to another meeting, but I'll defer to my
Well,
colleagues.
and let me say that the reason there's no strikeout version is if you look at ordinance 1.2, there is no 2H, which is what this is. So it's
I
all
asked the
in.
question if this
yeah,
was new language,
it's all
and then
new
people are
language.
saying, no, it's not new
Well,
language.
it's started from the TEP,
Right.
so it's not entirely new language from the TEP, but in terms of the ordinance that you received in your packet, it is entirely new language.
Yeah, okay, so part of,
So what I would like to do,
And
given
it's that
Commissioner.
prior to the allocation of funds paragraph?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is my next speaker was Commissioner Arnerich, and if you're willing to wait to make your comments after we spend our 10 minutes, Commissioner Murray, same, okay.
No,
So
I'm
we-
not. I want to ask a question.
Okay.
You guys need to take care of the country boy here. Are we replacing prior to the allocation of funds with H?
No, we are adding, prior to the allocation of funds in the TEP stays, we're proposing to add H to the ordinance, subject to the authority's concurrence. If we don't and adopt the ordinance, then the comments on this subject are what it is in the TEP. That is an option the authority can consider. So why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and that's okay. Okay, do you have something?
Well, my suggestion was going to be that we would take time and schedule another meeting because I think that this issue is much too important. There's been a lot of dialogue that's taken place, and we shouldn't go into this with anyone being confused in terms of what the language is or what it should be.
And that's why may I suggest that we take the 10 minutes, let people understand the language that's here, have more discussion.
That's fine.
And then that way we may want to provide direction to staff.
yeah.
Commissioner
Hold on,
Durant?
Hold on. Yeah, what I'm hearing is confusion, both to my left and to my right, is that while we're saying the language here essentially is derived from the language that was already in front of us on the TEP, it is in fact changed from what is the language in the TEP. But we have, but we have nothing in front of us that shows how it has changed from the TEP. And so we can either each sit here and do the word-by-word comparison and try to make sure we understand what it means and that we've done it right, or we can ask our staff who clearly derived this language from the TEP, didn't pull it out of thin air, to go back and bring us a red line that shows how this language is changed from the TEP. I don't think that's a hard request, and I'm not sure why it's not being understood, but that's what I've heard from both my left and my right. Is that doable, yes or no, and in how long?
Probably 5 minutes max. Probably give me 7 to make copies.
Okay, so let's take about 15 minutes so that they can bring that back, and then we have time to look at it.
We'll
and
take
think about
15
it.
minutes and
All right,
reconvene at
thank
about
you.
5 after 8. The perspective of making sure she understands the changes so that she can advise us as to which are substantive, if any, and then make recommendations that would provide both better clarity to the extent it's needed and make H sort of sufficiently consistent with what's in the TEP. So please, few more minutes of indulgence. And coffee.
It's ice cold from before, but it's okay. I'm just drinking it for the... Here.
Oh. The red line, so we're waiting for version 2 of the red line.
That you had discussed before we went to break, where we were switching operating to maintenance expenditures, and that didn't show up in the red line. So if you make that change when you're reading this. So I would like to go point by point to explain why I don't think these are substantive changes with one change. So the addition of any appropriation or reimbursement, I think, is just clarifying to the allocation of funds. I would not recommend adding cars from this measure to BART. If you read the language that's on page 1.2-16, the allocations of funds to BART is referencing the $300 million pot. And so I would recommend that we delete cars from this measure to BART to be consistent. The next change that says consistently maintained its commitment, which was struck out, to continued, to me, is also a consistent language and is not a change. I don't feel like changing the highest priority, deleting that, and just referencing capital projects is also a change. Including new rail cars, Positive Train Control, and Hayward Maintenance Station, that was deleted. That was an including to, but not limited, so it was just an example of what were capital projects. The next sentence, BART's preliminary fiscal year 2017 budget forecasts approximately $144 million of its operating allocations to capital projects. That's just a fact. It is just a statement of fact, so I don't feel like that is a substantive change. Okay,
Yes.
to capital
Yes,
projects.
projects are correct.
This next sentence, BART shall demonstrate that it continues to use an equivalent proportional share of its operating revenue for capital projects, allowing for normal annual fluctuations in capital project or maintenance expenditures. That, to me, is, as you saw in the previous statement, the board has to make a finding that BART is using its proportional share of operating allocations for capital projects, and this is just requiring BART to demonstrate that it's doing that. Okay. The next change is adding or other general fund revenues in where it says in years where BART fare revenues, and I don't think that is a substantive change as well. It also includes loss of regional, state, or federal funding, which I think can be seen as an unforeseen economic circumstance, which is already included in the language in the TEP. I think adding only to then the authority may release funds only is consistent with the existing language. And the last revision, which adds to the total operating revenues to help explain what disproportionately means, is just a clarifying statement. So I think as long as we delete in the very first provision cars from this measure to BART, and I think make the typographical changes that have been referenced, it would be consistent with the language of the TEP, assuming you all find that as well, and you could make that change to the TEP, and it would not require you to go back out to the cities and towns and county.
Thank you. So just to make sure that I understand, so your deletion goes from line 1 through line 2. So you're deleting all the words of cars from this measure to BART?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mitchell.
Correct. And then this language would not show up in the ordinance under section H. It would just be the last paragraph of page 1.2-16 of the text.
Commissioner Arnerich.
So, Mala, just to read, to be clear, because we didn't talk exactly, we said cars, but in the first sentence it would read, prior to any appropriation, allocation, or reimbursement of funds to BART from this measure, comma. Is that what you intended? So you take the word cars and take out the second to BART? Is that how you're to make it read as a sentence?
It would read prior to any appropriation, comma, allocation, or reimbursement of funds to BART.
From this measure.
It would delete, comma, the authority board, because it currently reads allocation of funds to BART. And the allocation of funds to BART
No, I know what
refers,
you-
to the
And you don't
300
think
million.
leaving from this measure is important? Okay.
I'd recommend striking
Okay.
that
And
language.
Is one of the reasons for that is that this refers only to this line item in the expenditure plan,
Correct.
not to the entire measure.
Correct. And
So
I
BART
don't
may
want,
be eligible for funds under other line items.
correct.
So I would just make the comment that I think this is great. I think it meets the intent of what that negotiation was that precipitated this. I think from the city's point of view, as a city rep, I think this is in the context of what all of our discussions were. And again, it's like making a series of words that create adjectives to further explain. I think this is great. I think we should incorporate this in the TAP.
Well, my request or staff's recommendation when it gets time for a motion is that this language be incorporated both in the TEP and the ordinance.
It's your preference if you want to include it in the ordinance. I think if you did it in the ordinance, you probably then, in the ordinance portion, want to refer to the 300 million, because I think you're only limiting this maintenance of effort to the 300
Yeah, with that one
million.
change, right.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I know what the typo changes are, that in the 7th line, there's an S on projects. In the next line, the IT is plural. It's not plural, but it's possessive. And then finally, in the following line where it says capital project, or I think, Chair, you said it should be maintenance expenditures as opposed to operating. And I just want to make sure that that was reflected one more time.
Well, there's two operating revenue.
Yeah.
Revenue stays, it's operating expenditures becomes maintenance expenditures.
Correct. And I just wanted to reconfirm that that's what the language being voted on.
Are there other comments on the draft language? And I do have some speaker slips. I'll call on those people in a minute. Seeing none, let me move to the speaker slips. Mr. Bezos, welcome. Now on 1.2.
My first concern about the TEP is My first concern with the TEP, let me turn it back on there. Under implementing guidelines, administration of plans, salary and administration cost caps, I think there should be a cost cap on the executive director's salary. I'm going to note that the Brian Kelly, this California Secretary of Transportation, according to the a website in 2014, base salary $177,000, total compensation $236,000. According to the Contra Costa Times or East Bay Times website, Mr. Iwasaki's 2014 base compensation $248,000, total compensation $372,000. I don't understand how someone who is an executive director of a county transportation agency is making much, much more, I believe $70,000 more in base salary than the person who's responsible for the entire state. So I'd like that language to be put in there. We do have federal judges. Their salaries are linked to members of Congress. There ought to be some type of linkage. I think this is obscene. It was an issue in the San Ramon elections back when, a few years ago when the mayor was running for assembly. That's the first point. Second point, under innovative technologies, communities, $65 million. I need to note that Public Utilities Code, Section 180-109 says that the authority shall rely to the greatest extent possible on existing state, regional, and local planning and programming data and expertise, rather than a large duplicative staff and set of plans. So I want to know why this is so essential. Your language that allowed this measure to go to the ballot said they were essential transportation. I don't understand how, does Caltrans do innovative technology? Well, how is that legal according to that section of the Public Utilities Code? Third, the Public Oversight Committee, I'm concerned it says it's, quote, independent, unquote, oversight, and it's, quote, ensure that all funds are used consistent with the measure, unquote. Problem with that is that you do not have independent body. The Oversight Committee is going to be relying on, for example, your attorney to decide what's legal or not, and apparently your attorney has a certain opinions that might not be that independent voices might want to look into. So I think there ought to be some provision put in there from the Independent Oversight Committee to get some type of independent advice from the power structure, the attorney at CCDA, et cetera. Second, I don't understand whether 2 seats reserved for labor. One ought to be sufficient, like in Alameda County. Second, I question the appointment of a seat reserved for Bike East Bay, in part because it had engaged in, I think, illegal conduct. It appointed its own director. It made an illegal appointment in January of 2016 to the Alameda County Watchdog Committee. And also, it's under investigation right now. There's an open investigation by the Fair Political Practices Committee, my understanding of its practices in the 2014 election in Alameda County. And third, there were some things, East Bay Regional Park District is looking into. The person, Mr. Campbell, was in the room here. A banner showed up at an event that should not have been there.
For the speaker. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next speaker, I'll give Mr. Campbell a moment. Joel Ramos, followed by Elaine Welch, and then Dave Campbell and Debbie Toth. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having us this evening. And when we learned that there was all this shift in the maintenance, or this addition of maintenance of efforts, and the intent to really tie up BART's hands in running the way that they do to provide service, we at Transform, the organization I represent, became deeply concerned with the direction that language was headed in. Over the years, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a harsher critic than Transform has been of BART. And, we were deeply divided over a number of different projects that they were working on. But over the years, with the hiring of the new general manager, and they've taken a terrific direction with their board. There seemed to be no reason not to trust them in the language that they were putting forward to tonight. So we're here to support the new language now, and certainly hope that it will suffice to meet the needs of whoever we need to support this measure. Transform has not yet taken a position. I'm leaning towards supporting it. We certainly think that it's would be wonderful for the county. But most importantly, of course, one of our primary reasons for supporting it is because of the fact that we're going to get those new cars that BART so sorely needs. As folks that are really looking out for the riders of transit in this county, we totally understand BART's concerns, and hope that you'll accommodate them as you adopt this language tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, Elaine Welch. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Elaine Welch, and I'm the CEO of Mobility Matters. As the leader of this nonprofit agency that's been struggling over the last 2 years to roll out mobility management projects, primarily for seniors and people with disabilities, I am really here tonight to say thank you. we don't have any funding in Measure J except some that Transpec does provide for us with our volunteer driver program, which we're so thankful for. And we are so in support of the TEP, not only our piece, but what surrounds it. As a member, a longstanding resident of this county, I'm very proud of what I have seen you all do to make this happen, and very thrilled that we're almost on the ballot. The passage of this measure will result in ensuring that finally we'll have a funded mobility management plan in Contra Costa County that will be based on person-centered transportation system without gaps. And that this will happen because we public and private sectors for the first time are going to have the human and financial resources to actually make this happen. This is my dream come true. I'm running out of time. Not by illness, by age. As I remind you every time, we're all 3 hours older than when we got here tonight. Please don't forget that. Doesn't matter how old when we came in. I am so appreciative of the time, effort, hard work, and I added a word to this tonight as I sat here, angst, that this board and the CCTA staff have put into this measure and commit me, my agency, and everyone I can educate about this to vote for it and to do everything that we can do and that I can do as a citizen and as a hardworking member of this county who is aging right here and needs these services, that this will be successful. And I thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dave Campbell, followed by Debbie Toth. And hers is the last speaker slip I have, so if anyone else would like to speak on this item, please complete a speaker slip. Welcome.
Dave Campbell, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay, here to say that it's great to see that we are continuing to keep the unity that got us here in May and that we saw in the cities in the next month, where all city councils were in support of this. Very important, and so thanks for everybody for working hard to come up with language that keeps a very valuable partner of ours, BART, on board and in support of this measure as we go forward. And we'll continue to work with BART to make sure they improve their service in Contra Costa County and throughout the whole Bay Area. Super important. So thanks everyone for your efforts. Looking forward to moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. And finally, Debbie Toth. And again, if anyone else would like to speak, please complete a speaker slip.
She's telling you, take that away from my mouth. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. You can hear me, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I was really concerned tonight that we were going to head in a direction that would either delay or destroy the incredible amount of work that's been done by this board, by this man, by this staff, by the EPAC members and the community members who have all rallied together to come around something that makes sense for everybody. And as you know, accessible transportation is not just something that we'd like to have, it's something that we need to have, and we as a community must provide this for people who cannot get from point A to point B because they can no longer drive themselves. And as Elaine mentioned, we need to do it in a way that puts the person at the center, not a system that's created, and then we see how people fit into it. We need to be smarter, we need to spend less money, and we need to do it in a better way. And we can achieve that with this measure as well as having the community support rally together. And I just want to say before this little interesting language, whatever it was tonight, party, for lack of a better word, I did get my final vote from my executive committee for RSNC to support this measure. So we stand here. I'm assuming I would have to get my attorney on my board to say it's okay to say, yes, we supported it with this additional party that happened this evening. But we do stand behind it, and we are ready to do an education effort throughout the county to make sure that voters know what this does for accessible transportation and the rest of our community. So thank you, bless you, and good night.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? All right, so let me bring it back to the authority board, and I guess first question I would have is, are we comfortable with the red line language as revised with the several modifications?
Yes.
And then, if so, do we want to include it only in the TEP portion of the ordinance or also create it with some modifications as a new section H? And I know that Commissioner Murray wanted to speak.
I just wanted to speak because I wanted to see how the evening unfolded. I came in here as Joel Ramos and David Campbell and Debbie Toth did, worried about the lack of unity that we were going to have. When I saw the initial language, it was something we couldn't live with. And so I'm so grateful to the hard work that went on in the other room. And I want to acknowledge Pam Herhold, Deidre Heitman, Carrie Hamill, and my colleague, Joel Keller, for helping to work out this language, because we couldn't have voted for it at the beginning. And I was really fearful that the partnership that we had built over these months and months and months that I sat here and all of a sudden was just thrown for a loop was going to disappear. But in fact, we did bring together this partnership again. BART has put in $600 million in money from operating to capital over the past 5 years. That's highly unusual. Most transit agencies don't do that. So we do have a record of keeping this money going into our capital program. I think the fact that you are dedicating $300 million towards us, we are giving back $100 million to you, and then putting in this level of commitment in the maintenance of effort is a super commitment from BART and from this agency to keep working together as partners.
Thank you. Commissioner Durant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those who've spoken. What I want to do, just so that we have a clean, clear record of this, is that I learned at a break that part of how we got to the place we were at tonight was through some other activity that, as far as I know, hasn't been put on the record this evening, and I want to sort of make sure that it's clear. That as our staff articulated earlier and in the executive director's report from our regular meeting this evening, our staff has gone out to all of the cities in Contra Costa County and gotten commitment or approval without any objection to the existing TEP. They also went out to other folks in the county in the spirit of educating folks and getting feedback. And when we got that feedback, some of the feedback was that the language that was in the TEP with respect to this particular issue wasn't clear enough, wasn't specific enough, wasn't detailed enough to be comfortable for some of the other constituent groups who we hadn't really had at the table before. And so apparently what happened, and I'm going to ask Ross to confirm as our staff guy so we have an official record of it, that at some point, having received this additional feedback, our staff put together a proposal for the revision to this language. That language got circulated to BART and perhaps others. BART had a particular visceral reaction, I think is a fair way to put it, to that language. And what was going on outside of the public purview at this point was the attempt to negotiate language to simply address what appeared to be the issue that was on the table, was the need to have this be a clarification and have it be detailed and specific. Is that a fair recitation of what's happened, sir?
Yeah, that's correct. As you say, there's been discussion over a period of time. The actual negotiation and trying to find the right language began on Friday.
Okay, great.
Actually, after the packet went out.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you very much. So with that, I don't have any further questions. I wanted that for my own personal comfort to feel very comfortable that we were being very clear with the public about what happened and how we got here. Having said that, having looked at the new language, and I appreciate everybody's forbearance in getting the red line, it certainly helped me a lot to understand what we're doing and to be comfortable with the conclusion that all this really is language that clarifies what was our original intent in the first place. It does give more specifics and metrics that can be measured and articulated. And so I would look at it as merely a refinement of the existing language, non-substantive in nature and not substantial. And I would be comfortable with us proceeding.
So is that a motion to amend the last paragraph of page 2-16 in the...
So moved. In the fashion that we've discussed. And what I was to say, and I do think it's helpful just, if for nothing else, that it kind of gives the gravity of having it in both places to go ahead and put the language in the ordinance also.
So there's been a motion by Commissioner Durant, a second by Commissioner Arnrich. May I ask if your motion includes allowing staff to make minor modifications to the language to go in item H in the ordinance. For instance, you said it needs to refer to this particular line item.
To make the changes that the attorney, sorry, what's your title with us, General Counsel?
General Counsel.
All right, the General Counsel articulated earlier with respect to the 300 million. Yes, sir.
Just a general question. General question, are we going to, that's just to make those modifications for that specific thing versus moving all that? Because I had just one comment on another
Yeah, we
item.
still have to then adopt the ordinance as modified.
Okay,
So
great. Thank you.
are there other comments on the motion? Commissioner, yes. Ms. Subramanian.
If the motion could also include the finding that you made, that you found that these revisions to the TEP were non-substantive and clarification and wouldn't require going back to the cities, towns, and county.
100% agreed.
Is that acceptable to the seconder? Okay. So further clarification on the motion and agreed to by the maker and the seconder. Other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So now is there discussion of the ordinance as amended? Commissioner Arnridge, I think you had a question.
I really just had, and I will defer to all the wisdom sitting here. I'm used to, been around a while, more than 2.5 decades in politics. I look at things and I always say, how can I convince this somebody else? So I showed the chart that says benefits key. And people looked down at the things that they were interested in. They didn't look at the top. They liked a couple of things at the top. And I know we had a lot of thought going in here, and it's going to relate to what goes on the ballot about an order of a couple of things. The thing that struck the people that knew nothing about what we were doing, I said, what on this list do you like? 2 things they stood out, and they thought, well, why are they down lower on the list? They assume, like most people, they're less important. Right? We don't mean that, or we don't say that. But improves transportation connectivity, integrates new technology. Most everybody I've shown to that, those 2 items, people were really attracted to. So this is on page 1.215. So my suggestion is, again, because we're going to, this is what the public will see, one of really 2 documents. Does that make sense? I know our consultants have looked at this, and I know they looked at feedback. To move those up higher, because truthfully, I couldn't get anybody to really read the whole list. They saw the first couple of things, and they didn't have a really great idea. And I said, what about these other items? And they said, oh, that's a great idea. What does it mean? And then they asked a question. So just for your consideration.
Just a point of clarity, what did you just say?
What I was asking was,
you want to move 3 up? And
I'd like to suggest that we move improves transportation connectivity, integrates new technology, those 2 items to items 3 and 5, or 4 and 5, I guess. So it reduces congestion. That was a big hit. Reduces greenhouse gas emissions. That wasn't necessarily a big hit, but I think it's important. Improves BART service, and just move those other 2 up there.
Okay.
The other ones to the average person, unless you're part of that unique user group, was not important. So if you're part of that user group, the theory is, I will see something I like, but to the general population, those things are important.
Other comments to that suggestion? Commissioner Pierce?
Yeah, I think I would take exception to, oops, sorry. I can hear me. I think I would take slight exception to that. I don't disagree with your concept. And I think probably when the consultants helped put this together, they did it based on how these different things polled. But I would suggest that perhaps moving them to 6 and 7 instead of quite up that high. I know in much of Central County and South County and maybe even East County, the one that's in number 4 right now might not make as big an impact, but it certainly will in parts of the county, in West County. And certainly Dave will tell you that expanding the bicycle access and that sort of thing hits a very large group as well. So I think that's where I'd make the break, is after that one, and move the transportation connectivity, road smoothing, Traffic smoothing perhaps needs to be in there. We found that polled very well, and maybe that goes in with the transportation connectivity and traffic smoothing. I don't know.
I think that's a good idea.
But I think that might be a better order, but I'm going to defer a little bit to the experts on how this makes the biggest impact.
And I would just put in a vote for pedestrians, because I think both of you are putting pedestrians lower than these other two, and we all get to be pedestrians occasionally, even if it's not our
So
major.
you're back to being the same order.
Sort of, yeah. So we're all over the map.
Maybe we leave it alone.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Perfect. I think we leave it alone. No, people.
That's right. There you go. You're safe. Right.
No, each through the chair.
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
Well, you know, when I looked at it, my we go by eyes just like you do on a ballot, because it's right. Well, first thing that got me, I saw the BART car. I dismissed the bicycle. I don't ride one. And no, I'm sorry for the bicycle people. And then obviously I drive a car. So I mean, it could have been in any order. And so leave it like it is. We'll pick it out. People don't know what the heck they're talking about.
All right. I'm sort of sensing that there's a preference to leave it as it is. So that brings us to, would anyone like to move this ordinance or item 1.2 as amended?
So moved.
Commissioner? No, that was the amendment to that section, so now motion by Commissioner Arnold, second by Commissioner Hudson. Any further discussion?
Yeah, if I can.
Yes, Commissioner
quickly, I think the points that Commissioner Arnridge is making are valid, but where they're really valid is in the campaign statement. When you're sitting in there, yes or no, that's where it's got to hit you.
You're revising your motion?
No. I mean, when we get to that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, before we vote, I would just like to thank all the people who've worked on this over the last, 96 hours. I woke up this morning in Pinecrest at our cabin and was down at the lake at 6:20, thinking I was going to drive back. And based upon what I had heard the evening before, things were good. Then I heard, probably about 9 o'clock, that things weren't so good. And then I got a series of phone calls while I was driving back, and so I was talking to people a lot on the way home. And what was impressive is everybody came together in a spirit of making it work. And we've had conversations this afternoon with people on all sides of the issue that we talked about. And hopefully they will all be able to agree. But what's particularly impressive is the cooperation that everybody brought to the meeting. Obviously, there were some differences of opinion at the beginning, or it would have been done by 6. But I just wanted to thank everyone for that. It was greatly appreciated. So with that, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
We need a
that's
roll
right.
call
I'm sorry.
vote.
Please, go ahead.
Commissioner Abelson? Commissioner Hudson? Commissioner Mitchoff? Commissioner Glover?
Yes.
Commissioner Butt?
Aye.
Commissioner Pierce?
Yes.
Chair Townsend?
Aye.
Commissioner Romick? Commissioner Arnrich? Commissioner Durant? Commissioner Taylor? Motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you. Well, that took a little while. So that brings us on to item 1.3, which is to approve Ordinance 1603 imposing a transactions and use tax to be administered by the State Board of Equalization. Mr. Chittenden.
Yes, thank you. And this is really the ordinance that's, that is with the BOE as they will collect the tax and distribute it according to the provisions that are in here. I would like to draw your attention to the handout packet again. The first item is in the handout packet. It's page 7 here of agenda item 1.3. And Mala and her staff have been working with BOE, and at the late hour yesterday, they came back and asked that we remove the language that's shown there. I will defer to Mala if you have any questions about that. change or the ordinance in general. It's, by and large, it is boilerplate language used by Board of Equalization. Staff recommends you adopt this ordinance, and this one must be by 2/3.
Right, okay. Is this also a roll call vote?
Yes, we'd recommend a roll call vote, and again, it must be by 2/3 majority.
Are there questions of staff? I do have public comment on this item. Seeing none, Mr. Bezos, welcome.
Please don't shout at us.
Okay. Okay. It's difficult with the microphones.
I think that's
Is it working now?
Yeah, it is.
Right. Sorry about that last time.
Good evening. This comes to the serious part now. We're talking about a sales tax increase. Sales taxes are regressive taxes. They hit the poor and the working class harder. You need to be taking this vote very solemnly with that in mind. Keep in mind, with a 0.5% increase, we're talking about the necessities of life, like a $2 tube of toothpaste now costing a penny more. And we've heard some anecdotal evidence, for example, in the Mount Diablo School District about some of the families in the Monument Avenue corridor, for example, where they needed something, postage stamps, and for some of them it was too expensive for some of them to afford a 47-cent postage stamp to mail things in concerning schools. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that we'll end up having the highest sales tax in the rate. I believe El Cerrito would go up to 10.5%. Again, that hits the poor and the working class harder. But what I really want to get, and I want an answer to this, Section 18, this is the language that will go on the ballot. It says the key word is augmenting the sales tax. First of all, I want an answer as to why you use the word augment. Why not increase? Why using the $10 word? I can tell you back when I talked to people in Alameda County when they used augment, an Asian woman who was an immigrant, and I asked her, what does augment mean? She didn't know. That seems intentional. I want you to explain to me why you used augment instead of increase. Use the test about going to your children with their allowance. If you go and you ask some children and say, I'm going to augment your allowance, the answer for a lot of them will be, is that a good thing or a bad thing? This is to obfuscate. So why not use the word increase? Secondly, I think the word rate needs to be put in there. After augmenting the sales zone kid, I want augmenting change to increase, to be honest, transparent to voters, instead of obfuscating. And so I want to hear exactly, again, why you use the word augment. Why augment? Second, sales tax. Why isn't the word rate there? Because when it says you're augmenting the sales tax by 0.5%, it implies that you're paying 0.5% more on your amount of sales tax as opposed to 0.5% of the entire transaction. And you look in the Revenue Taxation Code, they use the word rate. So I want the word rate to be inserted there. And then also with the $97 million, it implies almost as if you're going to be capped at $97 million for each of the years. And with inflation, I think it's going to go beyond that. So again, it's hitting people in the pocketbook. And you're trying to obfuscate that with your so-called public information campaign. The Supreme Court has said you need to include the negative and the good, including the increased sales tax rate. That needs to be part of your public information campaign. You're trying to obfuscate. So again, I'm making those two requests. Change augment to increase, or a word that most people can understand. And second, to consider including the word rate. But again, augment. Where does that, who talks like that?
Great. Thank you. Are there any questions? So I had seeing none, thank you.
Okay, where does the word augment come from? Are you afraid to answer this? Why are you not avoiding it? It's a direct question. I'll get it through the Public Records Act. I mean, you are intentionally trying to obfuscate.
Your time is up. Thank you. Maybe my understanding is that augment is typically used in measures like this.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So bring it back to the authority. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item?
I do have one question.
Yes, Commissioner Durant.
There were two questions raised in the last commentary or the last question that I would like to have addressed, which is, should we in fact be saying the ordinance augmenting the sales tax rate by 0.5% as opposed to just augmenting sales tax by 0.5%, and if not add rate, why?
We are, I believe, at 75 words exactly.
Got it.
So if we did want to include rate, we would need to delete a word.
Got it.
Yeah, I should have, and part of my introduction pointed out, this is the section that would be the ballot question, beginning with the words "to implement" and ending with "local residents?" ? So that does, as written, consume 75 words, which is the legal maximum.
Okay. So I just had a quick question for either Mr. Chittenden or Ms. Subramanian. So in the first whereas, in the third line, it talks about transaction and use tax in the incorporated and unincorporated territory of a county. Should that be Contra Costa County?
We can make that change, yes.
Would it be better if it were Contra Costa County or just a county?
This will only apply in Contra Costa County.
Okay. All right, other, Commissioner Simmons.
I just wanted to offer an observation on the suggestion of inclusion of the word rate, because the rate in every city and in the county is different throughout. And if you use, you then will be saying this 0.5% actually modifies rate rather than tax. And this is an increase in the tax. And so I actually think this is clearer as it's stated than another version. I just wanted to offer that.
Yep, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Arnerich.
I agree with just Bob said. The way I was reading it, sales tax is what we say. That's a tax. That's clear what it is. We're raising the sales tax 0.5%, regardless of what each city has in their own jurisdiction. And here's the one thing. I'm not changing any words. I just like to suggest that the last bullet, which says reducing traffic, be moved up to the 4th position. And here's why. No, think about it. Repairing potholes is number 1, improving BART. Number 2, improving highways, reducing traffic. Those are the 4 bullet items that I got from my little crude survey among people who knew nothing about what we've been doing for 2.5 years. That's what they care about. And I'm just saying, you're going to get in there and you're going to say yes or no. That being at the bottom, I'm just suggesting to move it up higher. Just food for thought.
Okay.
Chair, may I comment on that?
Yes.
So I couldn't answer the question about the little icons and the TEP itself. This one, staff and the consultant team did specifically compare this with the polling results, and we believe this order is with the polling results.
Commissioner Durant and then Commissioner Pierce. Did you have anything else? Okay, you're just lights out. Commissioner Pierce.
I would just suggest that many of us read lists in different ways, and many folks prefer to be either on the top or the bottom of the listing of candidates because you don't get mixed up in the middle. So maybe reducing traffic is still a good thing. Well, it is. It is, but not being in the middle is better. So in that perspective, your reducing traffic almost becomes number 2.
I move the item.
All right, so we'll have a roll call vote. My understanding is we need to adopt this by at least a 2/3 approval for it to be effective. Okay. Please, go ahead.
Commissioner Abelson? Commissioner Hudson? Commissioner Mitchoff? Commissioner Glover? Commissioner Butt? Commissioner Pierce?
Yes.
Chair Tatson?
Yes.
Commissioner Romick?
Yes.
Commissioner Arnerich? Commissioner Durant?
Yes, and aye.
Commissioner Taylor? The motion passed unanimously.
Great, thank you. So that brings us on to item 1.4, which is to consider Resolution 1641P requesting the Board of Supervisors of the county to call and consolidate an election submitting to the qualified voters a ballot measure seeking approval of a 0.5% transactions and use tax. Mr. Chittenden.
Can I interrupt and just
Okay.
move the item, please?
All right, there's a motion and a second. I do have, are there any questions before I take public comment? Mr. Bezos, welcome.
Good evening again. You've now crossed over into territory, as I understand, under Public Utility Code 180-201. You've adopted the plan. I think now the Stance of Being Mott and Vargas versus Salinas kick in. You may not take sides anymore. It is now up to whatever campaign committee to take any further action in your so-called informational campaign. But I want to point out that I don't think you're acting reasonable. There is a reasonable commissioner exercising due care would be questioning your attorney about these issues, about whether it is accurate that just because you can promote the transportation expenditure plan. I mean, the question on the ballot is to implement the transportation expenditure plan. I mean, so now the public information campaign, according to what the Stanson v. Mott says, is you may not take sides. Everything has to be a fair presentation of the facts, and there's that quote from Justice Brennan about that a fair presentation of the facts includes the negative along with the good, including the increased tax rate. So that is something you need, and you need to get that. Your public information campaign needs to reflect that. You need to, and if you need to be asking questions, you need to be educated on what the proper role is. Because, again, you need to be a reasonable commissioner exercising due care would be questioning, getting the answers to those questions. Because you've all taken oaths to the Constitution of the state of California and the California Supreme Court, and also you have those statutes I cited earlier about the government code section that you need to be, 8314 I think it is, you need to be following that. And I don't think that you're on the right course right now with this. And I don't want you to claim later on that you were surprised and, you were reasonably relying on counsel. I don't think, based on what I've heard so far, and that's why, pursuant to the Public Records Act, I'm requesting all the guidance that can be disclosed about this, including your general counsel's statement that you're able to just promote, because it's just the TEP you're promoting. It's not the ballot measure. You are trying to obfuscate and get around the fact this is a tax increase. This is a tax increase. This is a tax increase, and you're trying not to tell that to the voters intentionally with the so-called educational plan. You're not complying with your constitutional duties.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? So I had a quick question of Ms. Subramanian, and maybe Ms. Willis. So what are the procedures we're going to follow during the item we discussed earlier under 1.5 of ensuring that whatever we do complies with all applicable laws and regulations?
I've been working closely with CCTA staff on that, so I'll be reviewing documents, reviewing websites, and we've already had a pre-meeting on Monday to discuss that in the event that you took the actions you've currently taken.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Commissioner Durant.
All right. On I guess it's on item 1.4 is the one that we're tackling now, which is the sorry, or is it 1. Yeah, we're on 1.4. Okay. So I think with due respect to the speaker, I do want to go ahead and move the item 1.4 and ask the Board of Supervisors.
It's already been moved and
Yeah.
seconded.
Where was I? I apologize. All right. But I do think it's fair to say the comments were noted, they're simply disagreed with. I don't want it to appear that we're not listening through the tone. We've heard it all, I just don't agree with you. So thank you for that. But
okay. So I think the motion was made by Commissioner Mitchoff. No, Commissioner Pearson. I've forgotten who seconded it. Yeah. Commissioner Hudson. And is this a roll call vote or just a voice vote? Voice vote. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Any abstentions? Great. Unanimous. Thank you. And thank you again. We will meet again in September.
You can all come to the board meeting on August 2nd.
That's right, and cheer you all on.
Randy will. And we can bring bunches of people with us.
Right, right.
This is a huge deal.
Yeah, Dave, bring my
Well,
motion that says that Mary's the state.
yeah. So anyways, again, I just want to thank everybody who's here and who came and who's worked on this over the last many months to get us where we are tonight. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.